Welcome back. This is Crossbeats Production, and you're here with Nate28. So I just wanted to bring to you guys a beat making tutorial. This is another one of those beats that I sort of came across making because of some other ideas that I came up with in the first place. So if you've watched the other tutorial that I created on my channel, I believe it was called How to Make Vintage Samples, or your own vintage samples. This is pretty much the byproduct of that tutorial. So I ended up creating somewhat of a beat. It's not completely finished yet, but it's definitely something more in direction of where I was going with it. So I want to show you guys how I came up with that, and I guess the idea behind, how it all started, and the process that I did in creating this beat as well. So let me just first show you the sample. Now, if you're familiar with the other video, I'm sure you know about the sample. I'll put the link in the description below, and also remember to give that thumbs up and all the rest of it. So subscribe as well, because it really helps me out with this channel, and I just want to really get this channel off the ground and get some subscriptions going on, and really just help out people that are trying to create beats and get into the beat making process. So really appreciate everything you do and supporting this channel and everything like that. So let's get into it without further ado. So this is a sample. I'll just play it out to you first off so you know what I'm talking about, and then you can have a listen for that. So this is the first sample. Let's play that out now. Okay, so that's the original sample that I came up with. So if you watched that other video, you'll know exactly how I came up with that. And I basically, rehearsing this again, I went back into my Rhodes keys piano. I just created a keys piano, played out the instrument, and then I used what they call vinyl, which is, I'll see if I can find it right now. No, it's not on this insert anymore, but it's isotope vinyl. I'll just show you the plugin just while I've got it up here anyway. If you don't know what it looks like, isotope comes down here. You get this plugin called vinyl. That's basically the plugin that I used, and I created this kind of vintage kind of sound with that plugin and playing out that instrument in the keys that I played on the Rhodes piano. So that's vinyl, in case you don't know what it is, and you can get that plugin for free on isotope isotope vinyl it's called, and that's free off the isotope website. So if you want that, just go and download that, and you'll have that kind of same vintage sound that I created on this Rhodes piano. So what was the next thing I did with the Rhodes piano? So first off, I haven't EQ'd anything like this. As you can see, there's got one bus send here, which is a reverb. So the reason why I'm sending a reverb is because I pretty much like to reverb send anything that I'm going to do. I don't like usually putting the reverb on the actual channel itself. And it's not wrong to do that. It's definitely something you can do if you want to. But I just feel like I want the original signal, and then I feel like I want to mix in the altered signal. So you can do that, like I said. I'll just show you an example where you can do that. So for example, Native Instruments, they make a reverb plugin like this, and you can actually mix the wet and the dry to create a wet and dry reverb. So you can go to 100% if you want, 60, 40%, whatever you feel like at the time. That's one way of doing it. And that's not wrong. It's definitely not wrong, but I feel like I prefer just to send it to a bus. And I'll show you how to create that bus if you'd like to know, maybe in another video as well. I can even show you quickly on this. But pretty much what you do, you hit there, you select a bus or a send, and then you create it. And then that would create itself, and that would go to, for example, this thing here, which I've created. And you'll see there, I'll just make that a different color so we know what's going on. Wait, maybe not that color. There we go. So that's my reverb send, and if you see that, that's sending to this, and it's got reverb on there, and I've labeled this reverb so you can clearly see what it is. Anyway, that's one of the things that I did on this track. So that gives it a bit of reverb, gives it that width that you kind of look for on the song. And then the next thing I did when I created this track, so I kind of figured out what keys I was playing in at the start, and then once I knew the key I was playing in, then it wasn't so hard to create the bass line and everything else to go with it. So the next instrument I believe I created, actually it wasn't an instrument, the next things I did was create these drums right here. Now generally I'd probably want to color code them kind of similar to each other, so it's kind of, you know, very much the same. Maybe not that red color though. Whoa, that's intense. Yeah, that'll do. I'll go with that. All right, cool. So let's go with that. So let's listen to the drums and see what they sound like on their own. All right, so very simple drums. Pretty much, let me just expand this out for you a bit so you can see what they look like. So it's basically the snare. It's just kick, kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, kick, snare, as you can see. So it's not a difficult drum beat to make, and I made that in Machine, so I would have loaded up an instance of Machine. Normally I do this in a couple of different ways, but first off, I generally would open up Machine on its own, and I would just open up the Machine track, as you can see here, and I'd create my drums out in here, knowing the kind of tempo I'm looking for, and suit, you know, that kind of tempo. So for example, if you were going to use Machine, you could do that. If you have Machine, I'm saying. If you don't have Machine, you could just forget Machine altogether, and you can go into your browser here and you'd select your loops, go into your drums, and then you can drop and drag, like so simply. You just drop and drag stuff into there, and that would then give you your drum, you know. So you can create your own drums in here however you want to do that. That's totally up to you. But for this particular beat, I might do an actual beat from scratch just for the sake of it later on, but not on this particular track. So yeah, that's how I created the drums. So I created them very simple, and later on I'll probably add in a, you know, open or a close hi-hat just to make them a bit of a rhythm and get that going on. So that's the basis of the drums right there. Now that goes along with the velvet keys, and then the final thing here, well, not the final thing, but one of the other things that holds the track together real well is the bass line. So I'll just play this out to you, hear the bass line for itself. Okay, so how did I create that bass line? Let me just show you the instrument that I use. So it's the Mai Tai. I've used this setting here, bass 80s up front. I think I edited a little bit. I took off the delay, I took off the reverb, and I just went with this setting here, which is the Grand Class, and I've got oscillator 1 and 2 on. Now there's not much to this. It pretty much comes as a stock bass right here. So that's the 80s uptown. As you can see, I haven't done a whole lot to it. All I did was drag the cutoff down a bit, just so it's kind of a deep low end sort of bass, and I'll put that onto soft because the cutoff then isn't so harsh when you're doing it. And the LFO, I believe that's synced, that's onto sync, so just like that, it's turned off actually. And this LFO is also turned off, so I really don't need those on there, but for the sake of it, I'll just leave them there. Now it's on 8 voice. I've got this on poly, so it depends on how you want to have your bass. I mean, generally, if you don't want things to be overlapping, which in this particular bass playout, how I did it, it's not doing that. But if you want things to be played and then the other note cuts the other note off, then you put it onto mono, just so you know that, for example. Now, let me just show you the notes within this bass line. And, whoop, not that one, this one here. Okay, so that's the notes that I played out, so I'll just expand that so you can see what notes are. So it's B, D, E, B. B, D, E, B. So that's pretty much the whole bass line throughout the whole entire song. If you can see, pretty much repeats itself except for a few things here. I've cut it off and then it joins back in like a silent section, but pretty much. So as you can see, that's the simple bass line that goes along in the track. So then the next thing I did here, which is pretty much a copy of the notes that I've played out on the Rhodes keys. Now this is just the brass section of the track, so I'll play that out. Alright, so pretty straightforward stuff. Now, if you heard, that's very similar to this because that's pretty much the same keys that I used. I just haven't printed it yet. So it's still in MIDI format right now, which is kind of cool because that gives you the notes that I've played out for this actual track. So you can see that's the chord progression that I've used, and I'm pretty sure I came up with that just by messing around and sort of came up with the idea. I can't exactly remember because it's a little while ago since I made this track, but that's the chord anyway. So that's the chord progression. As you can see, it's nothing special. It's just a really pretty good chord progression, I guess. So that's that. Now the next thing I did with the violin, so I'll just solo that again. I'll just show you the notes that I've used. So D, E, B, D, B, E, B. So all in the same kind of scale of notes, just different areas of how I've played them out. So I'll just play this out to you. Now it's probably a bit quiet. I might have to turn this volume up a bit, but if you can hear, I'll just go back into here and I'll just show you what I've got. So this aftertouch thing, I've kind of set this a bit so it kind of does that warpy sound. It sounds a bit bizarre. I'll just play it to you now though. So as you can hear, it kind of goes up but then back down. I don't know if you kind of hear it on the video, but anyway, that's the way I did that. So this is a pad that I've played out, and that would have been the name for it within Studio One. I'm sure that's an instrument here. I'll just double check. Okay, so that's the pad kind of synthy kind of thing that I added to it, just to give it a bit more, I guess, solidarity and create more warmth in the mix. So, I mean, that's the basics of the track. I just don't even need this anymore. I don't know why I've still got it. I'll just remove that, and pretty sure that was from the other tutorial. So, okay, so what have I got here? These are the two buses that I created, and once again, you know what they are because I showed you before, but that's the reverb bus. That's the drum bus. Now let me expand these just to show you a few things and what I've done here. And you can see how I've then used the reverb and all sorts of stuff like that. So I'll just expand these quickly and show you exactly how I did it. Now, as you can see, a lot of these tracks, they have reverb sent on them. And they're all sending to this reverb bus. And the reverb that I've set on there is this reverb here, which is the Native Instruments and RC24 reverb. I don't know, I kind of like this reverb. I feel like it's got a really, I don't know if it's a unique sound, but it's got a decent sound to it. Cheers. So I set this to a large hall. The preset that I used, which was in the large, was the ballad hall, and I set that all the way wet. And I've pretty much left this, actually I think I changed the millisecond by delay, pre-delay, because that sort of suited my mix. The depth, I think I've left that. In this section here, this is basically just like sort of an EQ for the reverb, and it allows certain amounts of high-end, mid-range, and bass frequencies into your EQ. So if you can see the preset, it's kind of like that. I don't want to adjust it because there's no point, but you can see that's the preset I used. And the mixture that I've got is 100% here, but I'm just not setting all of the percentage right here. So I've got 29 or minus 29% on that, minus 33 on that. By the way, if you can see, I'm wearing this jacket. It's pretty cold here. That's why I'm wearing it. And we're kind of in the middle of winter at the moment. I think you guys in the US, if you're in the US, are in much summer right now, aren't you? By the way, I'm looking at going to the States, so that's kind of going to be an interesting thing to do. Anyway, off track there. So this is the reverb send there. That's -8. I don't have any reverb on this one because that's my, what is that? The Presence XT. So that's that track there. And what else? I've got reverb on this one, which is the pad. So I've sent some reverb there, and all of that's collected here. And if you've noticed, I'm using the console shaper as well. I kind of like to start using this from the get-go because it gives you a certain sound that, you know, if you add later on into the mix, you might not like it. and you know exactly how it's going to sound throughout the mix if you're mixing with it in it. So if that makes sense, I kind of mix from the start with the presumption that I'm going to use these kind of settings. I might tweak them later on, but these are the settings that I've actually put on here just to show you there. So anyway, so that's that. The drum bus here, which I've used a couple of different things. So I've got some chorus, which is Blue Cat's chorus. I can't remember if I got this for free. I couldn't tell you, it's been a while now, but I'm pretty sure I did because I don't remember paying for it. So if that's still there, check it out. It's a pretty good chorus plug-in there. So I use that for chorusing my drums sometimes, and I can explain chorusing a bit later on if you'd like. So the other thing I've got here is the H comp, which I really like on drums. I must say this is a really good plugin for drums in compressing them anyway. So settings I've used, what is it, 3 to 1. The threshold I've got -19, all wet, and I've got a bit of analog adding to it. The attack is at 12, release is at 1/16, and a little bit of added punch in there at 1. So that's the compressor I've got on the drums. I also use Transient Master from Native Instruments. If you notice, I kind of use a lot of Native Instruments stuff, and for good reason. They kind of seem to make really good stuff, and nobody seems to use it. I don't know why, but hey, whatever. So, Transient Master, why did I use this? So, all I did was I kind of limited the drums because I felt like it takes a little bit of the edge off the drums, and the transients still come through really clear and they sound really good, but it just gets rid of that edge. The other thing I did was reduce some of the sustain. So the sustain, if you can see, I'll just show you. I'll just make it a bit bigger so you can understand what I'm talking about. Okay, so this is generally this part here. That's the part where you first hit the transient, and then from there onto there, and then down there is the sustain. Pretty much the sustain is the loudness, sustained loudness, basically. So that's where it ends. That's where it slopes down, and then it goes to quiet. Basically this little bit here, I think that's like a bit of white noise or something, whatever the kick had on it. So that's a snare, sorry, but the kicks here, that's the transient, so on and so forth. You know what I'm talking about. So I added in the Transient Master just to get rid of some of that sustain. It gives the kick and the snare some kind of tightness in the mix. Sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't. Just depends on the drums you're using, etc. So I haven't added any transient in there because I didn't feel like it needed it. I might do so later. I don't think I will though, but hey, whatever. So that's that. I've got the console shaper on this mix, which no, I didn't. I didn't have that on there, I don't think. Hey, maybe I did. Who knows? No, I didn't. Okay, so anyway, so console shaper, you can put that on there as an insert if you want on the bus. Personally, I just prefer it on this final mix here, so I've got that set up, and that worked out well. So now, how do I come up with the ideas on the reverb and stuff like that? So it's basically playing it by ear. On reverb, I tend to just, leave all my tracks dry, and for the most part, I put a lot of stuff in mono. So as you can see, I'll just zoom in so you can actually see it. So this is in stereo. As you can see, there's 2 sections of the track there. But if you see my snare and, well, my kick's not mono, but my snare is definitely mono because it's only got one section of the track. My kick's actually a stereo kick. For some reason, I left that in stereo. I think it actually just sounded better that way. But you can most definitely put that in mono if you feel like that's what you need in your track. Every other track in this is stereo, and you'll see what the difference is between why you should put things in mono and why you should leave certain things in stereo. Throughout, when you go into your mix and you look for example, I'll just give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So if you've got PreSonus Studio 1.3, which is probably why you're watching this tutorial, you can look at your spectrometer. Now, there's a couple of things, so I'll show you that first. I'll just load that up on the screen, and I'll also show you, whoa, don't do that, the phase meter. Alright, so these 2 things tell you a fair decent amount about your mix. So if you're wanting to understand, one thing is phase correlation. So this is the correlation meter down here. This is showing you that the phase of the track, where your low end is and how your phase is sitting in the track. So right now, as you can see, I think this is the reason why it's making a lot of noise, because of inserts that I've got on the track and stuff like that. Let me give you an example. So this H comp, that shows you how much noise that actually makes, and having these two things set in. So basically, mix FX, that creates a bit of noise. You can see that, and the way it's sort of, the correlation meter is being affected by it. And if you've probably, I actually might do another video on how to explain why that is doing that and stuff like that, but I'm not going to keep it for this one right now. So the other thing is this adds analog sound. So this is why it's doing that. If you can see, that's got a certain sound to it. The way you change this, it just changes the type of sound and the way the analog sound is creating noise inside the mix. So as you can see, that's the reason why that's doing it. So if you never knew about that before, now you know. Okay, so let me just show you the phase of this particular track. So I'll just play it from the start, and I might just show you how this phase correlation meter works, and I'll also then explain to you how to get your mix to sound clear and crisp up front. Okay, so there's two things that you could have been watching there. I'm not too sure if you knew what to pay attention to, but the first thing was the correlation meter, right? So anything in the minus is telling you that some parts of the track aren't in phase. So if you watch that, so that's telling you that this track is in phase and my low end isn't being affected by the phase in my track. There is a lot of things that come into play when you want to have phase issues. Well, if you have phase issues going on, you'll hear things start to cancel out other things, like things that are causing phase issues with other things. They tend to cancel each other out within the mix. So that's one thing you want to look for, and you'll kind of hear it. You know what to listen for when you actually have heard it before. Anyway, the other thing is that I wanted you to pay attention to is this spectrometer here. So you can see there's a lot of energy down here. So a lot of the energy is down here in the track, and that's because the track has a lot of low end energy. So for example, if I was to just close this off just so you can see what's going on. Yeah, I don't think I need that. So I'll just leave that open. So if I keep this open, and I'll just show you exactly what I mean by that. And what I'll do is mute the things that are creating low end in my track, and I'll just explain to you how that is happening. So let's just mute the bass for now. So as you can see, most of the low end now is missing out of the track, but when you notice the kick come in, you'll see that low end start to appear again. So just wait for that. Okay. Alright, so if you can see, for example, my snare still has a fair bit of low end in it, and it does take up a bit of the low end field that I would have normally used for other things. So that's one thing that you want to watch out for when you're mixing tracks. The low end of your track is really important. So is everything else, but the low end of your track is pretty much what's going to affect the compressor the most, probably, out of anything else in the mix. So just give me a second. So that's one thing I always look for. So if there's something like that, for example, I'm sure there's another plugin that you can actually use that does kind of everything in one plugin. But I'm just trying to show you, if you have Studio One and you don't want to spend extra money to do anything like that, there's ways you can get around it. So that's the plugin that I use to see the low end. So for example, right, I'll bring up an EQ, and I might EQ out some of the low end. Let's just turn this off just so you can see that I'm not going to affect the top end right now. And let's just show you the low end. So take this EQ over here, let's pin that to that, and I'll just play the snare out for you and show you what I'm doing. Okay, so let's roll off some of the low end. Okay. So it kind of sounds like it's missing a part of the snare if you roll too much off, and you kind of hear it yourself. If you're listening to that, you'll know what I'm talking about. Alright, so to me, about 172 is probably as much as you'd want to do. So 172, and that's rolling off the most bulk of the low end on that snare. So if I play it all in context. Alright, so we'll add the kick back in. Okay, so if you want your snare to sound a little bit more powerful, you'd obviously add a little bit more low end in there, but I think that's probably... Alright, I reckon that sounds kind of clean, pretty good. So that's one thing you'll want to look for in your spectrometer to see your where your correlation is and your phase. I'll just show you what I'm talking about with the phase with the kick. Let me just turn this H comp off. Now let's turn this off so you can see the kick going down the center. So looking at this kick, right? So we've got parts of the kick going to the right a little bit on the phase, but mostly dead center. So I'll just show you another plugin that I usually use when I do my mastering, and I'll show you kind of what I look for in this as well. So let's just play this. Oh, I'll just turn that off for a second. Leave that on. All right. Okay. So you can see my kick, it's still in stereo, and that's why that you're not seeing a lot of the low end until you actually put this into mono. Then you see some of the kick goes dead center. So the kick's going dead center right now, as you can see. But if I take this off and I put that back up there, it's a little bit out, only by the slightest amount, and I don't really think that's going to affect your phase. If you can see, it's still in the +1 area. So that's kind of one thing that I would monitor if I'm going to do anything to do with, mastering later on with the track. But we'll get to that in a later video, and I'll show you how I go about that. So just wanted to show you that, the first things first, you get your bass, kind of get that somewhat mono. It doesn't have to all be mono, as long as this is on the right hand side, the phase correlation is plus and not minus, you're pretty safe. So as you can see, this bass, the bass just on its own is quite wide. It's phasey, it's going around, it's moving, it's definitely creating some energy in the track, but it's not out of phase. So let's explain that first off. Now the things that I'll be looking for then is, as you can see in this meter here, the spectrometer or spectrum meter, I'd be looking for that. And also I'd be looking for the loudness of the track, because you can see it's metered here. It's got some sort of metering to show you the loudness, and that's in dB. So I'd try not to go higher than about I'll say minus 24, something around that level, because pre-master or pre-compression, you don't want to have your track going too loud, and you definitely want to keep it somewhat within a range where you can actually work with it later on when you go to do mastering and add compressors, etc. to the track. So I'll just show you the first compressor I used on this track. Now if you have UAD, you'll know exactly what this is. This is the Alesia compressor. It's quite an interesting compressor. It definitely has a different sound to other compressors I've used. I've found that this compressor is really useful, and the most reason is because it has a mix dial, Right here, this is the mix dial, and you can dial in your attack, your release, your ratio, your threshold, sidechain, and the sidechain frequency. And also has a warm button, which is kind of cool, and a link and unlink button. Now, this compressor, like all compressors, to make them sound good, usually on a master bus, you don't want to compress too much. So I'll show you exactly how much I'm using right now, just so you can see. And we'll just move this to the side so you can see what's going on. Actually, no, I'll just move it back down here. So let's just show you the track with a bit of compression. Now you can see that little dot there at the 1 is like literally just kissing that dot. There is hardly anything going on with that. So I'll just show you so you can hear the difference. Now, to me, that it's crazy how good a compressor like this can glue a mix together just with the smallest amount of compression. So basically, this compressor is pretty much just taming the kick, the snare, and some part of the bass. For the bulk of it, that's the only part of it that it's actually really doing. So it's bringing the mix together. It's creating a cohesiveness to the mix. And I'm sure if you're listening on a good pair of speakers or headphones, you'd be able to hear exactly what I'm hearing right now. So that's the first compressor I used. So the settings I used, as you can see, at 5 milliseconds attack. Release time is pretty slow, so around about 390, somewhere like that. Ratio 1.4, and threshold at +3. So you're getting that kind of compression with that. Alright, so that's the first compressor. Next compressor. See, I like to use several different compressors on my final bus, on my 2 bus, just because they all have their own type of character, and they definitely bring a uniqueness to the mix. So these compressors, I don't want to make out like you have to have all these plugins, because there's no way in the world that you need to have all these. So I'll just show you actually without this plugin, and I'll just show you what Studio One has to offer, just for the sake of it, because you know a lot of people think that plugins are the be all and end all of the mix, and they most definitely are not. That is for sure. So let's use this stock compressor, and I'll just show you how to use this one to give you sort of the same kind of sound that Alicia compressor did. So we'll set that ratio at, I think it was a 1.4. What was the threshold? I think it was yeah, it was +3 something. So anyway, let's just not copy that. We'll just try and make it from what we got here. So I'll just set the ratio to what I think it might work on this compressor, and we'll work it from there. So let's just go with the release, a longer release, and the attack, kind of short attack again, about 3. Let's go with 3 millisecond attack, and see how we can go with this one. So let me just play it out, see if it comes out kind of similar. So as you can hear, I'll just play it with and without. Alright, so we're getting a pretty good compression with that compressor. So if you're looking for a plugin that can do the job, trust me, this plugin within Studio One is perfectly fine for doing that sort of thing, and you can do a lot with that compressor. Like, it actually is pretty amazing. It actually does a lot of stuff. So for example, if you go down to these settings here, just turn it on for a second. So if I put the filter on, you can actually make this into somewhat of a de-esser. So you can send the low cut so it goes up to about there, and you can high cut it if you want to, but say for example you want to de-ess your mix. And not affect your low end, that's the way to do it. So that's really good. It's got a listening filter. So that just shows you can do a whole lot of stuff with the compressor that comes with Studio One, just so you know. If you didn't know, now you know. Okay, so that's that compressor. Anyway, let's get back to the mix that I want to show you, and show you the compressor that I put on here next. Now this is the Neve 33609, and it's just an emulation of the original Neve compressor, which is a pretty interesting piece of hardware. I really like the sound of it, and that's why I purchased this compressor. But like I was saying to you before, you don't have to have these compressors if you want to actually have a track that sounds cohesive. You can use what's in Studio One, and it does just fine. So anyway, let's play this compressor, and I'll just show you this one as well, and we'll just show you what's going on with them both. Okay, so what have I done with this compressor? Now, as you can see, there's hardly any makeup gain. I'm not really actually trying to get a lot of stuff out of this compressor. I'm trying to get the sound that it creates and a little bit of, tiny bit of compression. Now, it's kind of hard to see, but the needle, I believe, it's barely moving at all. So that needle's hardly moving. So I've got it set more as a sort of a limiter style. But it's at 2:1. I've got 0 makeup gain basically. Yep, 0 makeup gain, and the threshold is quite high, so it's not really grabbing a whole lot. And the response is on auto, so it's set to auto the recovery. And there's 2 settings on auto. If you know about this compressor, it's got 2 different auto settings, and I've got a bit of the limit function happening, which is this function here. So that limits prior to the compressor, and that's set the threshold about 9 or 10 in between there, and the recovery is on the auto setting number 1. So that's more or less giving me a bit of sound. That's pretty much it, and it's slightly compressing by the smallest amount. You can't really notice it. So let's put this other compressor up here and show you exactly what this one is doing. So now I'll just move these 2 out of the way so you can see, and I'll give you an idea of what this compressor is doing. So let's just play it with and without. So without first. Okay, so I'm getting a bit of makeup gain through this compressor where I haven't had it really much on these compressors. So as you notice, the makeup gain is at about, I think it's +3 or 4. I'm hardly getting any compression on this again. I've set the attack to 0.1 millisecond and the ratio to 4:1. So again, it's more of a just really tiniest little bit of hugging the track, but there's hardly any compression. So I'll just show you, I'll play around with it and I'll show you what it does when you do hug the track a bit more, but really this is just barely minimal stuff. So So as you can see, when you really grab this threshold down, you pull it down, it starts to really bite the transients, and that's not what you're looking for on a bus compressor. You really just want it to really just hug the track and bring the mix together and glue it all together to make it sound cohesive. So that's exactly what it's doing. Now, after all those compressors, what do I do next? So again, looking at the spectrometer, kind of telling me that I'm pretty sweet with my low end here. So that's without low end in the track. So as you can see, a lot of the energy down here is pretty much taken out because the kick and the bass are missing. So if I add the bass back in, a lot of the low end comes back in here. Add the kick back in. So they kind of sit together pretty nicely. They're kind of filling up that space. Now if I went any more with those two things, it'd probably be too much of the low end to be in the mix, and it would start destroying my compression and all sorts of stuff. So that's something you want to look out for. Again, with the phase meter, you know how to do that. I've shown you that. So if you have any questions, by the way, hit me up in the comments, because I do definitely help you guys out, and I just want to be of assistance if I can. So what have I done with this, and why did I do it? So multiband compression. Now there's probably a whole entire video you could just do on multiband compression. This video is starting to get a bit of a time on it, so I just really want to quickly go through this. So all I've done with the EQ, first off, I've got it in stereo mode, took out some at the 1000 mark, kind of mid frequencies that I didn't like, and put a bit of a shelf on to take out some of the high end frequencies, and that's all I did with the EQ. It's on analog setting, on a high shelf on there, on a bell, and that's not even on, so I'll just turn that off. And I've got some low end frequencies on the low end shelf at 54 hertz minus 1.5. So that's just to take out, by the way, that's on a Baxendale shelf. That's really minimal sort of stuff, just to take out some of that low end. The next thing I'll just show you. Okay, so EQ gets rid of some of that MIDI stuff that you can add in the vocals into that area, all that sort of stuff. That's all I did with the EQ, very minimal stuff. Now, multiband compression. Now, all of this is, if you don't know what a multiband compressor is several compressors, well, one compressor in different areas of the frequency spectrum. So, for example, we've got this was in the 20 to 140, 140 to 2K, 2K to 10, and 10 to 20. So all of these frequencies are being affected in different ways by the compressor. They're all set pretty much at the same threshold, and I'm not too sure, I can't remember if I've used this on the final mix, but I'll just show you. Actually, I think I did, because I have set these settings a bit different. So the release setting is at 180, and the next setting here is at 60 milliseconds. This is a release time, by the way. Setting next is 60 milliseconds, and the next setting is 60 milliseconds. So the only one that I slowed down was the low end frequencies, just to, I guess, constrain them, keep them in focus on the mix, and go from there. So let's just play it with and without. My bad, let's start again. Okay, so as you can hear, everything's more glued together again. Just that final kind of touch to really get that glue going on. So what ratio do we have? It's at 2. Pretty much every single band is at 2. And the last band, the deepest or the lowest end frequencies, I've set at 1.9 because I didn't want to compress them too much, but I definitely wanted to hold them a bit longer, so I compressed it and held it at 180 milliseconds. So the next thing I did, which is going to increase the volume a lot on this track, so I might just quickly show you what I've done here, but I'll just pull this ceiling all the way down to here. Now let me just play this out to you with the maximizer on here, and you'll see exactly what I've done. So I've got the character set at 3.3. By the way, this is Ozone. If you don't know, it's Ozone 6. I don't have Ozone 7 yet, and I don't think there's much point yet to go to it, but hey, whatever. So let's just go with this. So we've got IRC3, which is the type of limiter that I'm using on this one. We've got True Peak Limiting, which is the pre-emptive, I guess it's the calculations before the actual transient, so it knows what's happening before the transient hits. And the maximizer is set at minus 12 dB. So let's just go through this and see what happens. Now, the reason why I brought this ceiling down is because if I left it up here, it would be a lot louder. And that's because we're pretty much compressing or limiting the actual track itself. So the thing I look for when I use the limiter, just so you understand, is I pull this down pretty much to the threshold till I hear the drums being crushed or just before that. And then I release it a bit further back up. And when I hear the transient on the drum, or the bass, when I hear that sound smooth and clear and crisp and still clean, that's when I know I've limited as much as I think I need to limit. So that's the kind of thing. As well, looking at the meter here, you'll see it's about -1. You can go to probably about -4, somewhere around that. -6 is probably as much as you'd want to go before it really starts to destroy the mix. So let's just play that out and see how it sounds. Okay, so I'm going to turn this ceiling up and I'll just show you exactly what it sounds like. So you might want to turn your monitors down while it's increasing. I'll do it slowly so you're aware of it. Let's go. Okay, so I think the ceiling, people think of this and however they want to think of it. They have ceilings that are about -3, -2, and they certainly can do that if they want, and that's going to create a really loud mix. But I like to keep my ceiling somewhere down at -7, or sorry, 0.7, or even -1, because I feel like you can hear the distortion in the track, especially if you're compressing or limiting the track a lot. I feel like you can hear that compression and the peaks really coming out the ceiling quite hard. So I feel like that's the best area for me anyway, at least on this track. Now with dithering, I stick to CD quality. I used medium dithering amount and noise shaping at high, and I used the filter DC offset just in case there's any DC offset on the track. So I'll explain DC offset in another thing because it's not too hard to explain, but it's a bit of a pain right now. So as you can see, the bit meter, that's turned on and it's turned off, and it's got this little bit of bits being added to it, which is just creating a bit depth, and it sounds a bit smoother to the ear. And just always checking compatibility. So the things I look for with mono compatibility, just so you know, is I try and listen to, especially when I'm mixing, I usually mix in mono anyway, and I'll probably do another mixing video just on how I do that. But when I'm mixing in mono, I listen for all the instruments to see if anything is missing out of the mix, and to see if all the levels kind of sit together in the mix and they're feeling cohesive within the mix. So as long as you can hear pretty much everything in mono, you're generally going to be pretty safe in stereo, and that's pretty much a good bet to keep a good mix in stereo. So that is that. Now that's pretty much the basics of this track. Now just putting this back on just to show you the console shaper. That was all done without the console shaper, and also it was all done without the compressor on the drum bus. So let's just show you the two together, and I'll just play this out to you and you can hear exactly what it sounds like, and let's go from there. You know what I really love about this console shaper, it just gives this really thick, warm sound that what you would assume a console does, it does to the mix. So that's why I love it, and that's why I mixed with this already set before I even started my mix. I had that turned on, and that was the thing I first started mixing into. So you can hear it gives that fullness, the warmth. The cross talk kind of gives that really unique kind of sound that some consoles do have when the channels are cross talking. That's some sort of an issue with electronics, but it gives this really nice sound. And the drive, it just gives that warm, thick, full sound for the drums and everything else in the mix for that matter. So that's pretty much the mix. I hope that this really helped you out. And I hope that you understand kind of the basics behind the mix, and also a quick kind of overview of mastering at the sense of what I've done on this track. So if you like this video, it's gone for a while. I really appreciate you sticking around, but please remember to give that thumbs up and smash that thumbs button, and also give a comment on the video, and just in general, just hope you learned something from this track. Peace.